And then he got into a video call with 3 other people, and all those 3 people were deepfakes. And of course, he actually transferred the money.
Yeah, funk it up, listen close to the knowledge that we're about to dose. Ooh, yeah. Face matters, ain't no joke. It's the podcast with a biometric poke.
Then it's ready for another episode of the podcast Face Matters, a podcast about technology, biometrics, and the prevention of fraud. And today we have a special guest. We have Pinar Alpay from Signicat, and as usual, Brage Strand from Mumbai. So maybe you'll do the introductions, Brage?
Yeah, sure. So today we're gonna deep dive and dig into the fraud landscape of the world, really, which is rapidly changing with new technology. But before you do that, you wanna give a bit more introduction about yourself and also say some words about Signicat?
I will. Thank you. And thanks for having me, both of you. My name is Pinar Alpay, and I'm Chief Product and Marketing Officer at Signicat. I'm based in London. Signicat is the leading digital identity provider in Europe, and we have solutions all across the digital identity lifecycle, all the way from identity proofing to orchestration of identity proofing solutions, to authentication, as well as high level of assurance signature solutions. And my background is in strategy consulting with Bain & Company. I worked at Barclays as head of strategy and planning. And before Signicat, I worked at WorldPay as in multiple product leadership roles. And now I'm at Signicat and leading the marketing and product functions. And that's my background.
Really cool. I find it also super interesting to combine the marketing and the product function. So as a startup mobile, we are kind of like, I'm really thinking, okay, how to build that together. And I think telling a story and building it is really connected.
Absolutely. And we found a lot of synergies when we brought product and marketing functions together. First, I started as Chief Product Officer, but then after I took over marketing, we have seen that the storytelling is much, much better when you have the content also attached to that.
And you get kind of like I would imagine you get more like the whole team actually producing what you need together.
Exactly. Yeah. And the timing of everything, sequencing, all works.
Yeah. Now we are already derailing, but that's building a company. So I'm a bit curious, a bit more about Signicat. Do you do stuff outside of Europe as well, or are you kind of like primarily Europe?
We are primarily a pan-European company, but we have followed our customers to the US, to Latin America, Middle East, as well as Asia. So we don't have feet on the ground outside of Europe, but we do have customers in 45 different countries.
That's quite a lot. Do you see any kind of like major solution-wise, if you do that kind of like before we kind of like dive into kind of like the fraud aspect, how big of a difference is the kind of like the US market compared to European or South America, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, even within Europe, there are lots of very big differences. Every country has its own different interpretation, for example, for onboarding on financial services. Some countries have EIDs, some countries have video interviews, some countries have automated video solutions. So even within Europe, if you want to do high level of assurance, onboarding, authentication, the digital identity that we do, then you have to adapt to local rules and regulations. And going in the US, of course, there's a massive market there, and it's a lot more homogeneous than Europe. And also what you see is a different level of digital awareness. It's not as high as, for example, in the Nordics that we see. I think the experience that we have on high level of assurance is directly transferable to the US.
Yeah, and you don't. How is kind of like the adoption of let's say you do an onboarding in a US bank. Is it primarily more a manual process, a document-driven process, or
it's a mix.
Yeah.
But just to give you an example from digital signatures, right?
Yeah.
In Europe, you have very high hurdles on especially high qualified signatures. There, it's a sort of audited process. You have to do identity proofing first. But in the US, those types of signatures, they are very happy to have simple electronic signatures.
Yeah.
So that level of education is still not there.
Yeah.
Same with the UK as well. The UK is also not that educated in the difference between qualified versus advanced versus simple electronic signatures.
Yeah, and I think so you on the signature platform you have a kind of like a vast range. One of the things that I'm kind of like in mobile we work with biometrics, but one of the things that I'm kind of like interested in also kind of like the link to signing something. Yes. And I'm either in a camp where okay you need kind of like super high security, everything is kind of like moving to IDAS high, or will everything be kind of like free? So I was kind of like just following some people on some channel where they're kind of like using kind of like these developer tools and just spinning up signature competitors, basically. I guess that it's more kind of like on the simple end. But do you have any kind of perspective on where the market is moving on that? Or?
I think that especially the topic that we're going to be talking about today with AI-driven identity fraud, you definitely need to establish, especially for high-risk transactions, you need to be able to establish who's signing the document and whether they are authorized to sign that document. You need to establish that to a higher level of certainty. So from what I see in the market is that higher level of assurance signatures are going to become much more important.
And we are not really living in a safer world, right? So I was kind of pulling up your report here from last year, right?
Yes, we launched it middle of last year.
And I see some interesting stats where you have I think 80% increase in fraud attempts, but then I think also one of the really interesting numbers is you have 2,137% increase over the last 3 years in deepfake related fraud, which is quite massive, right?
Yes. I mean, maybe it's not so surprising that in 3 years fraud should increase, and also identity fraud should also increase. But when you look at deepfakes and how it's increased over the last 3-4 years, it's the levels are unprecedented. 3 years ago, we were seeing 0.1% as percentage of deepfakes within overall fraud attempts, and last year when we took the cut from our own numbers, it was 6.5%. That's a massive increase. And if you think about it as well, within our businesses as well, right? 3 years ago, even 12 months ago, AI came in and it started driving massive amounts of efficiency in the businesses, and that was fantastic. But in the hands of fraudsters, where this technology, Gen AI, is becoming much more accessible and much more available, which means that AI-driven identity fraud is becoming much more sophisticated and being able to be doable at scale. And that is what's driving this massive increase in deepfakes. Yeah,
because that means, like we've seen over years and years and years, that within email fraud, they
phishing.
They send up like 1 billion emails.
Yes,
and 1 or 2 people are stupid enough to and now you can actually do that with deepfakes as well.
Exactly, and you're not stupid really when you click on it, because it's becoming so much more believable.
Yeah, it's really hard.
That it's not so easy not to get fooled.
And I think often you also combine it with other data, right? Okay, it's December, you're likely getting packages, right? Okay, let's send everyone a package link. Or you have some public information about something, and then you use that in a bit more targeted attack. But I think kind of like a bit similar stat to the 2000. I think we were looking into how much did the phishing increase 1 year after GPT, and I think it's like 1,200% in 1 year, and that's basically them making automatic phishing emails.
And that's making account takeovers
Yeah.
a lot more prevalent, of course, and that's what we see in the data as well.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting topic. So I was also browsing in the report of some kind of like of the core kind of like emerging trends, and then you have account takeover, and then you talk about authorized push payment. So probably could you kind of like talk a bit more about both?
Yeah, of course. Account takeover is when the account of a sort of legitimate account of a legitimate person is taken over by a third person. It could be a family member, or it could be a sort of totally different person. And it could be done many different ways, like phishing, for example, or you just basically scanning a QR code that you see on the side of the street, and you're thinking that you are paying for your parking, but actually you are just giving away your account details. That's what we call account takeover. And authorized push payments, this is actually a sort of very, very current topic in the UK at the moment, where you basically trick another person to send a payment to another person, either knowingly or unknowingly. They may think that they have done this for a purpose, while actually it's completely for a different purpose. For example, romance scams are usually linked with account push payments.
Yeah. And then you build trust with someone, and then you just, okay, accept this.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can imagine that you often would have both cases at the same time as well, some kind of version of account takeover where fraudsters have access to, say, a web part of a banking app, for instance, and then the user is authorizing payments in another channel, a bit on instruction.
In authorized push payments, the user themselves is making the payment, and account takeover is maybe a third person is doing the payment.
Yeah, and actually doing it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But now you can create avatars who can have the Teams meetings for you.
Yes.
So my avatar could have a Teams meeting with your avatar.
Exactly.
And then
well,
we get
last year, I mean, what our study found was that firstly, banks and big financial institutions are falling victims to this type of fraud more and more. Last year, 3 years ago, the percentage of this type of fraud was around 20%, and it's now 32%. But even with this knowledge, some of the respondents of our study, they've said actually 70+% of the respondents said that AI-driven identity fraud will never be sophisticated enough to fool financial institutions. But exactly the example that you gave last year, this was actually a big news story. It was either February or March, where a finance worker in Hong Kong got a phone call from supposedly their CFO. And the CFO was asking for payment of $25 million into a bank account for one reason or another. And the guy didn't believe it. And then he got into a video call with 3 other people. And all those 3 people were deepfakes. And of course, he actually transferred the money. So this is becoming more and more believable. And we're seeing the data in our research as well. Well, not in our research, but even Signicat's own data. So maybe just as a background, Signicat also has an eIDV product, which we are calling Video ID, where using video streaming technologies, you show your passport, and our technology using machine learning models identifies or detects any document tampering. And then we do likeness and liveness checks, again using machine learning technology and random liveness challenges, etc. So we actually have looked at the data that we have collected in that product. And we found that the sophistication of these types of scams is increasing quite a lot, especially the more sophisticated scams. So we look at the sort of presentation attacks, which is where you wear makeup or masks to spoof another person, or use multiple screens, show multiple screens to spoof another person. That has increased quite significantly, but is plateauing now. The second type of attack is injection attacks, and that's where you sort of inject malware into the video with the aim of basically fooling that technology. And that type of attack, which is a lot more sophisticated, has increased very, very significantly in the last 3 years.
And then you might combine that with some deepfake technology like face swap, where you do them.
Yes, face swapping as well is part of it, basically.
So then you inject the real-time face swap into the system.
Yeah.
Which is a challenging problem as a defender to fight against.
But if we end up then that the technology that was supposed to make our lives easier ends up making it more complicated because we have to prove ourselves every time.
Yes, but it's I think the important thing is to be able to strike the right balance between three very important things. The first one is user experience. So you want as smooth a user experience as possible and only introduce friction when you have to. The second thing is, of course, you want to minimize fraud, right? You want to have the secure technologies that, protect you against fraud, but also you want to minimize the cost of preventing fraud. And all of those need to be in good harmony. And that only happens if you bring together multiple technologies, do appropriate risk analysis, and based on that, have a reactive technology that puts the right friction in the right places.
And I think the right friction in the right places, that's really spot on. And I think we need to move into a world where we are much more mindful of that. And I think one example from your report again, right? I'm reading that there's still a lot of places where you probably should use strong customer authentication where you are not. Yes. And strong customer authentication for our listeners is that you have basically multiple factors and a way of verifying the identity of who's doing something, such as using biometrics in combination with something else. And that I'm a bit surprised to see that's kind of like still an issue in kind of like on a European level.
Yes, it is. And when we asked the respondents, there are 1,200 decision makers in 7 countries in Europe and in 4 different sectors, so banking, fintech, insurance, and other financial services. They said that, this is 3/4 of them said that this is definitely on their radar. So they want to do something about it one way or another. But only about 1/5, 22% said they already have something in place. The rest said they are going to have measures in place in 12 months, which is a little bit worrying because if you think about where we were in AI-driven identity fraud 12 months ago and then extrapolate 12 months later, I think that it is a little bit problematic. But of course, everybody has good reasons. Other priorities, lack of budget, lack of expertise, they are all valid reasons.
And things takes time, and especially in the financial services sector.
Yes, it takes time to take a decision even and then move the ship into a different place. It does take time.
But I think for the decision making, you have kind of like the percentage level on deep fakes, right? So I think probably decision makers need to, or in the next years, going to realize that some decision needs to be taken faster, basically.
Exactly. And, the number that we put in the study is an average number, of course.
Yeah.
But when you look at when you double click on the industry level data, you see, especially in industries where the reward is high, like consumer credit, you see much, much higher, more than 10% share of deepfakes in actual fraud that we catch. So, some industries really need to take heed.
And I know you play a lot around with creating these AI videos, and I think us around the table probably realize that we can't trust any media these days, right? And I think that's some of the problems that the industry needs to deal with. And I think right friction at the right time, I think actually you can potentially make it more secure and better than what we have today. So it's not kind of like an end of the world scenario. But I think you have real risk, right? So another example that I see here is document frauds, right? And then when you do kind of like identity proofing and onboarding. And I can imagine that's also an area where these kind of Gen AI techniques are...
Absolutely.
used.
I mean, this is out there, right? There are actual websites that sell fake passports. And you don't have to go into the dark web or deep web in order to be able to source that. Realfakepassports.com, for example. You can buy yourself a Norwegian passport for $50.
But one thing, I mean, you talked about the financial industry and banking and stuff, but like most of companies are not financial companies. They're like in construction or whatever, but they could also be the target of deep fakes. And so how should they work to prevent it? Because the managers of those companies probably have no idea what AI is. More than
I think it's about education as well. Right, so what we tell our clients is 4 things, and that's for financial institutions as well as public services, e-health, wherever you have data and that you need to protect, especially if there is a financial gain at the end of it, then we tell 4 things. The first one is use a multi-layered strategy, and what that is basically introducing friction at the right time and using a combination of technologies that working together can give you a sort of an adaptive answer paired with risk analysis. The second thing is to think about the customer experience and covering all the vulnerable fronts. So think about the user experience from beginning to end, from onboarding to returning users signing in, and then doing business with you, authorizing a payment or just looking at their balance. There is a difference, and the level of security that you can introduce at both levels can be different. And even signatures, because that is also part of doing business. And also even, after you have onboarded the customer, it's about thinking through at regular intervals, refreshing the data that you have on the customer with ongoing monitoring. The third part of it is to battle AI with AI. And this is something we sort of use also in a lot of our products. We sort of try to stay 2-3 steps ahead of the fraudsters using the new technologies in our data set with our updating our machine learning models all the time. And the last piece is humans, because humans are the weakest link, and education is super important. Probably your company also does these phishing tests every once in a while. And they are really super important.
Yeah, and it really works as a learning exercise.
Yes.
I also think in some way you have some interesting, I think, dynamics in the fraud landscape, because the fraudsters, they focus on what works, and then they find something that works, and then that hole is kind of like closed. So I think you kind of get a gradual maturity and also kind of like the good guys mature, right? So okay, now it's a lot of stuff that I've been working with, authorized push payment for financial services. Okay, then we need to deploy more measures. And then I think it's also going to then be gradually easier for other industries to actually have good solutions, because you have some of these high value targets that is basically paving the way a bit. But I think one interesting area that I'm always surprised when I talk with banks is actually the lack of fraud, especially on the kind of like corporate side, with corporate customer, and of course you have CFO fraud and those kind of, but typically there's a lot of fraud attempts targeting regular people.
Regular people, of course, but also B2B companies as well. Actually, we are also seeing that to a lesser extent.
Yeah.
But yes, in the B2B area, we also come across deepfakes.
Yeah. And I'm a bit curious if it's kind of like under-reporting in the B2B area in some situations on kind of like fraud rates, or if it's that, okay, the fraudsters are focusing a lot on these B2C cases.
Good question. I think it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah.
So what's going to be like the next thing in this area? What's on the horizon? From both the fraudsters and from technology perspective? Yeah,
I think from a technology perspective, as I said before, it's the fraud vectors, as they increase and multiply. I think the defense vectors are also going to increase and multiply, and trying to sort of stay ahead of the fraudsters in both technology and also the methods that they use. And also, using different technologies to combat different types of fraud. I think that's the key in the short term. In the long term, of course, other technologies are happening, sort of quantum cryptography, etc. as well. They are also in the mix. They will be in the mix.
Yeah, and as kind of like almost trigger event when we have kind of like quantum machines breaking encryption, then then we need to react.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what role do regulators and authorities play here? Are they up to speed? Do they understand the severity of this?
I think they are understanding. But of course, also for companies, it is a matter of striking the right balance between data privacy and defense against AI-driven identity fraud. So making sure that we are on the right side of data privacy, but also having a sort of practical view on things. And I think regulators are seeing that. And in many markets, I'm seeing different projects on data sharing, for example, between banks. Norway recently, Financial Services Authority recently announced a data sharing project, for example. There are similar initiatives around the European countries as well. And also Data Governance Act kind of encourages data sharing between companies when it comes to fraud. So there are different aspects of it pulling in different directions, but it's also about finding the balance there.
We're getting close to wrap up. You have any famous last words?
Yes, I do, because now I'm scrolling down in the report again, and as a biometrics company, I couldn't be more happy, because I found a setup here where what's the best defense method to prevent AI-driven identity fraud, and then you have biometrics as the number one. So I'm happy to end on that note. If you guys are. Yes, I'm happy as well. Mm-hmm.
Great. So that was another episode of Face Matters. Thanks a lot to Pinar Alpay.
Thank you for having me.
And to Brage Strand, as usual. And we'll soon be back with another episode of Face Matters.
Tuning out to Face Matters, feel free.